The worst thing about being invisible was that no one ever bothered to lower their voices around her. Nellie had learned that early, long before the snow, long before the cabin, long before the night she crouched behind the stone wall of the great hall and heard her husband's voice say her name like it was something he needed to be rid of. "She won't last the season," Dorian said. He was not whispering. Why would he? She was only Nellie. She was only the Omega he had married for the land deed her father had left her, the small parcel of territory at the edge of Veldmoor that sat between his family's eastern border and the Silver River. She was only useful on paper. The healer confirmed it. Her wolf is too weak to sustain the cold. If she survives past the first frost, I'll be surprised. There was a pause. The fire in the great hall crackled. Nellie pressed her back against the cold stone and did not breathe. And if she does? That was Lord Harwick, Dorian's uncle, the man who had smiled at her during the wedding ceremony, with teeth too wide and eyes too still. Then I'll find another way. Dorian's voice was flat, bored, almost. The deed transfers to the husband upon death. It's clean. It's quiet. No one questions an Omega who fades in winter. No one questions an Omega who fades in winter. She stood there for a long moment after their voices moved away, after the fire crackled on and the hounds shifted in their sleep, and the world continued as though nothing had broken. Her hands were pressed flat against the stone. The cold of it moved through her palms, up her arms, into the center of her chest, where something had just gone very, very still. She had known, perhaps. Not the words. Not the shape of it. But there had always been something wrong in the way Dorian looked at her. Or rather, the way he didn't. The way his gaze moved past her at dinner. The way he never asked if she was cold. Never noticed when the trembling in her hands grew worse at dusk. She had told herself it was simply the manner of an alpha who had not chosen his match. She had told herself that some bonds grew slowly. That patience was its own kind of faithfulness. She had been very, very foolish. Nellie moved through the corridor before her legs decided whether they were willing to carry her. She moved the way animals moved when the ground shifted beneath them, not with a plan, but with the oldest instinct there was. Away. Get away. The stone floor was cold through her thin slippers. She had no boots on. She had come downstairs only for water. She had come downstairs in her sleeping shift with her golden braid half unraveled and her kappa forgotten on the bedpost, and now she was walking faster, then running, her braid swinging against her spine, her breath coming in short, silent gasps that she pressed behind her teeth because the walls had ears and the hounds had noses, and she could not be caught fleeing. She reached her chamber, bolted the door, stood in the center of the room with her chest heaving and the candle on the table burning low, and her own reflection staring back at her from the dark window glass. Pale face, wide eyes, the faint blush that the cold always raised on her cheeks now looking like shame. She did not cry. There was something in her that wanted to. Something young and foolish, that still believed tears could change the shape of things. But the older part of her, the part that had survived her father's death, and the council's dismissal of her claim, and 3 years of being handled like an inconvenience in her own married home. That part knew better. She moved. Her hands did not shake as she pulled the small chest from beneath the bed. Inside, the deed to the Veldmoor parcel, her father's seal pressed in red wax, a small leather purse of coins she had been setting aside since the first month of her marriage, because something in her had always known. Some quiet, persistent whisper she had spent years trying to silence, that she might need to leave. A wool underdress, her warmest stockings, a linen headcloth, the gray cloak with the deep hood that she had bought herself at the autumn market when Dorian had told her she didn't need a new one. She dressed in the dark, by memory and firelight. She tucked the deed inside the inner pocket of the cloak, against her heartbeat, where it would be the last thing they could take from her. She pulled her braid free, replaited it with quick, practiced fingers, tied the end with a strip of cloth. The window opened outward over the kitchen garden. She had noticed that on her first week here, the ease of it, the low drop, the soft soil below. She had filed it away without knowing why. She knew why now. The night outside was absolute. The first frost had not yet fallen. But winter was crouching at the edges of everything. In the way the bare branches clicked against each other in the dark, in the smell of the air, which carried iron and pine, and the particular coldness that had no name but the body recognized immediately as danger. Nellie landed in the kitchen garden with both feet, stumbled, caught herself on her hands in the dirt. Cold earth, damp. The smell of it rose sharp and real around her. She got up without looking at her palms. She knew where she was going, roughly. East, then north, following the river road until she reached the edge of her father's territory. Her territory, if the deed still meant anything, if the law still held for an Omega running alone through the dark. There was a village there, Ashvin, where her father's old steward had once lived, where a healer named Ren had treated her as a child, when the wolf sickness first made itself known in her blood, and everyone else had looked at her with the specific pity reserved for things that were not expected to survive. She did not know if Ren still lived in Ashvin. She did not know if the road was safe. She did not know if her body would hold through the cold, if the weakness in her wolf, that frail, flickering presence in her chest that had never fully manifested, never shifted, never howled, would surrender before she reached anywhere safe. She knew only that she was walking, that the coin purse was warm against her hip, that the deed was against her heart, that behind her, in that stone manor with its wide-toothed lord and its bored, calculating husband, someone had said her name like she was already a problem solved. She was not solved. She was not done. The road north was narrow and rutted, and the trees on either side grew close. Nellie pulled the gray hood low and kept her step steady, and thought about her father. About the way he had pressed the deed into her hands the month before he died. Not with ceremony, not with grand words, but quietly, in the morning, over porridge, as though it were simply the right thing to do. "This is yours," he had said. "Whatever happens, this is yours. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." She had let someone tell her otherwise for 3 years. She would not do it again. She walked for what felt like hours. The cold deepened. Her thin slippers were not made for road travel, and she could feel the stones through the worn soles, and her feet had gone from cold to numb, to something she was choosing not to think about. The wolf sickness crept in at the edges of her awareness the way it always did when she was exhausted. A trembling in the bones, a dimming at the corners of her vision, the sense that the small flame inside her was guttering. She stopped, leaned against a tree, breathed. Through the trees to the west, she could see firelight. Not the firelight of a manor or a village. A single point of warmth. A cabin, perhaps, or a woodsman's shelter, set back from the road behind a dense row of pines. She stood there for a moment, her breath misting in front of her face, her feet truly beyond feeling now, and she weighed the danger of a stranger's fire against the certainty of the cold. She stepped off the road. The cabin was small, log-built, the chinking between the timbers crumbling in places where winter had worked its way in over the seasons. A thread of smoke from the chimney. One shutter hanging crooked on its hinge. She could hear faintly the sound of children, not crying, but the low murmur of small voices, the particular sound of children who had learned to be quiet because quiet was safer. She raised her hand and knocked. The door opened almost immediately, as though someone had been listening. The man in the doorway was enormous. That was the first thing she registered. Not his face, not his expression, but the sheer scale of him. The breadth of his shoulders filling the frame. The black braids falling past his jaw. the leather armor he still wore as though he had not yet decided whether the night was done. His eyes, when they found her, were the pale, startling blue of winter sky, and they moved over her in one swift, thorough assessment, her hood, her face, her cloak, her feet, and settled. He said nothing for a moment. Nellie lifted her chin. Her legs were shaking. She did not let them show it. "I need shelter," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. "I can pay." His gaze dropped to her feet, then back to her face. Something shifted in his expression. Not pity, exactly. Something quieter and more careful than pity. "Come inside," he said. The inside of the cabin was warmer than she expected, and smaller. A single room, with a stone hearth taking up most of the far wall, and a fire burning low but steady inside it. A rough-hewn table. 2 pallets on the floor near the fire, and on them, 2 children, small and fair-haired, watching her with wide, solemn eyes from beneath a shared wool blanket. A girl and a boy, both young enough that their faces still carried that particular roundness, but old enough to understand that a stranger at the door in the middle of the night was not an ordinary thing. Nellie looked at them, and something in her chest pulled sideways. The man, she did not yet know his name, had moved to the hearth without ceremony. He crouched before it and added a log, and the fire took hold of it immediately, throwing more light across the room. The shadows retreated. Nellie stood just inside the closed door and felt, for the first time in hours, the specific agony of warmth returning to frozen feet. She bit the inside of her cheek and said nothing. "Sit," the man said, without turning around. He nodded toward the bench near the hearth. She sat. She kept her cloak on and her hood up and her hands folded in her lap, because old habits did not dissolve in warm rooms. The girl on the pallet, the older of the 2 children, perhaps 7 or 8, with the same pale coloring as her brother, was watching Nellie with an expression that was not afraid exactly, but was measuring in the way that children's expressions sometimes were when they had learned that measuring was necessary. "She's cold," the girl said, not to Nellie, to the man. "I know," he said. He rose from the fire, went to a wooden chest against the wall, and pulled from it a rough wool blanket, which he crossed the room and held out to her without comment. His face, up close, was harder to read than she had expected. Strong jaw, short dark beard, a thin scar running from his cheekbone toward his ear that had healed cleanly but never disappeared. His blue eyes were calm. Not soft, exactly, but still. The kind of still that was not emptiness but discipline. She took the blanket. "Thank you." He went back to the fire, set a small iron pot over it, the kind used for heating broth. From a covered crock near the hearth, he ladled something into it. Barley by the smell of it, with herbs she could not quite name. Dried thyme, perhaps. Something earthier beneath. "You're running," he said. It was not a question. Nellie considered denying it, the way she had spent 3 years denying everything that was uncomfortable. She looked at his back, at the broad set of his shoulders, at the 2 children who had gone quietly back to their breathing and were perhaps already half asleep. "Yes," she said. He nodded once, stirred the pot. "From a mate?" he asked. The word was neutral in his mouth, clinical almost. "From a husband," she said, "which is not the same thing." A pause. She saw the slight shift of his head, not quite turning but acknowledging. "No," he agreed. "It isn't." She didn't ask him anything else that night, and he didn't ask her. He set a wooden bowl of broth in front of her and went to sit on a stool near the fire with his own, and the children slept, and the wind moved through the broken shutter in low, persistent notes, and Nellie ate and felt the warmth move through her by degrees, slow and painful the way warmth always was after real cold. When she had finished, She looked up and found him watching her. Not the way Dorian had watched her. Past her, through her, at the space slightly to the left of her face. This man looked directly at her, with attention that was not intrusive but was genuine, the kind that registered detail without demanding explanation. "The shutter," she said, because she needed to say something that wasn't dangerous. "It needs rehanging. The pin on the upper hinge is worn through." He glanced toward it, back at her. "I know. I noticed a pile of cut timber beside the cabin. You have the materials." "I do." "Why haven't you fixed it?" Something passed across his face that might have been, in another man, embarrassment. In him, it looked more like pragmatism confronting its own limits. "I've been away," he said. "I returned 3 days ago. Other things came first." She thought of the children, of the broth that was thin but warm, of the blanket that smelled of pine resin and clean wool, and something else beneath. Cedar, perhaps, or the particular outdoor smell of a man who spent more time in forests than in halls. "I can fix it," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then, with the ghost of something that was not quite a smile, but occupied the same territory, he said, "You can fix a shutter hinge." "I can fix most things," Nellie said. "My father was a practical man. He believed his daughter should be as well." The not quite smile deepened briefly. He looked back at the fire. "In the morning, then?" She did not sleep well, but she slept. The man, who had told her his name was Sebastian when she asked, simply and without elaboration, had given her the better of the two pallets, closest to the fire. He had taken the stool, his back against the wall, his arms folded, and she suspected he did not sleep at all. She suspected, from the quality of his stillness, that this was not unusual for him. In the pale gray light before sunrise, she woke to the sound of the children. The boy, younger, perhaps 5, with his sister's same fair hair and a small gap where a tooth had recently departed, was attempting to reach a wooden cup on the table that was just beyond the stretch of his arm. The girl was watching him with the expression of someone who had decided this was his problem and not hers. Nellie sat up. Her body protested in the way bodies did after cold and flight and insufficient rest. She ignored it. She reached across and handed the boy his cup without comment. He stared at her. Then he said very seriously, "Thank you, lady." "You're welcome," she said. The girl was watching her again with that measuring look. "What's your name?" she asked. "Nellie." "I'm Petra," the girl said. "He's Finn." She nodded at her brother, who was now examining the cup as though its existence was a matter of great philosophical importance. "Our father brought us here from the northern garrison 3 days ago. He said we're staying until spring." Nellie processed this. Northern garrison. She did not know enough of the kingdom's military geography to place it precisely, but the word garrison told her enough about the nature of Sebastian's absence, and the black leather armor he still wore told her the rest. A warrior. A ranked one, by the quality of the leather and the brass of the buckles. She did not ask more. She had no right to ask more, and she understood instinctively that this was not a man who offered information without reason. She got up, folded the blanket, set it at the end of the pallet. Then she went to the crooked shutter, examined the hinge, and went outside to find what she needed. The morning was iron gray and cold, the sky pressed low over the pine tops. Her breath came in visible puffs. The timber pile was where she had seen it from the doorway. Split logs, neatly stacked, and beside them a wooden crate of tools. A mallet, iron nails of various lengths, a draw knife, a small hand-forge awl. She found a short length of iron rod that would serve as a replacement hinge pin if she could work it into shape. She had done similar things a dozen times in her father's house, where practicality was a kind of love. She was kneeling in the cold dirt, working the pin against the edge of the stone step to straighten it, when she heard Sebastian's boots on the threshold. He stopped, looked at her, looked at the tools. He said nothing, which she had already begun to recognize as his first response to most things. "The existing pin is sheared," she said, without looking up. "The wood around it is sound. A new pin, properly set, will hold through winter. I'll need someone to hold the shutter steady while I seat it." A pause. Then he crouched beside her, not close, leaving distance, but near enough that she could see the detail of the scar on his cheekbone in the morning light, the way his blue eyes moved over her hands, her work, the iron rod. "Where did you learn this?" he asked. "My father's estate. He had no sons." She kept her hands moving. He decided that was not a reason to leave things broken. Sebastian watched her work for a moment. Then he stood, took hold of the hanging shutter, and held it perfectly level without being asked. She set the pin, tapped it home with the mallet. The shutter settled true and straight in its frame. The gap that had been letting winter in closed to nothing. She sat back on her heels. "There," she said. He tested the swing of it. Open. Closed. The hinge held clean. He looked down at her, and again there was that quality in his gaze, direct, measuring, but without the weight of judgment. As if he was simply seeing her, which was a thing she had not felt in a very long time. "The children's milk," he said. "The goat pen at the back. The latch is broken. The goat got out twice yesterday. If you can fix the latch, I'll repair the east wall of this cabin before the frost comes. The chinking is failing in 2 places. You'll feel it when the wind shifts north." Nellie looked at him. The arrangement was stated plainly, practically, without the softness of charity or the edge of condescension. A trade, an honest one. Something in her chest, that small, flickering wolf flame that had been guttering all night, steadied itself almost imperceptibly. "Agreed," she said. She did not tell him her last name. He did not ask. The children came to the doorway and watched them both with the particular solemnity of small people who understood, without being told, that something important had just been decided. The frost, when it came that evening, found the shutter closed and the chinking mended and the goat secured in her pen. It found Nellie at the table by firelight, the deed pressed between the pages of the only book on the shelf, her hands wrapped around a clay cup of warm water and dried lavender, her gray cloak hanging by the door like something she had not yet decided to take back. It found Sebastian on the stool by the fire, his eyes on the flames, the children asleep and breathing, the cabin holding its warmth against the dark. Neither of them spoke, but the silence between them was not the silence of strangers. It was something she had not felt in 3 years, the silence of a space that was not hostile, of a room where no one was calculating her worth or planning her disappearance. It was just quiet. For now, that was enough. She had been in the cabin for 6 days when she found the royal seal. It was not hidden, exactly. It sat on the bottom of the wooden chest, beneath a folded riding cloak and a pair of heavy gauntlets, pressed into a square of dark wax on a folded parchment that she had reached for by accident when searching for a second blanket for Finn, who had developed the beginnings of a cough. She would not have looked at it at all, except that the wax caught the firelight in a particular way. Deep crimson, with the impression of a wolf's head encircled by a crown. And she had seen that seal before. Once, as a child, on a proclamation her father had received from the capital. Once again, on the letters that had arrived the year of her marriage, bearing the kingdom's authority on matters of land transfer. The seal of Veldmore's ruling house. The seal of the AlphaKing's council. She set the parchment down without opening it, replaced the gauntlets, found the second blanket beneath it all, and tucked it around Finn's small shoulders, and pressed the back of her hand to his forehead, and told herself it was only a mild chill, which she believed, mostly. She did not mention the seal to Sebastian, but she thought about it all through the evening, while she mended the torn hem of Petra's dress by firelight, and Sebastian sat at the table with a spread of parchment maps, his dark braids falling forward as he studied them, his blue eyes moving in the slow, methodical way of a man reading terrain rather than text. Warrior, she had already established. Ranked. Northern garrison. The armor was not ceremonial. It was worn and repaired in places, the leather darkened by use rather than decoration. But a royal seal meant something more than garrison rank. She had been raised to read the architecture of power, even as an Omega who was not supposed to need that knowledge. Her father had taught her anyway. She kept her eyes on Petra's hem and kept her thoughts to herself. On the 7th morning, she woke before dawn to find Sebastian gone. The children were still sleeping. The fire was banked carefully. He had tended it before leaving, which meant the absence was planned. She pulled on her cloak and her boots, which he had quietly set by the hearth to dry 2 nights ago without mentioning that he'd noticed them soaked through, and went to the door. He was in the yard, in the pre-dawn dark, and he was not alone. 2 men stood with him, both large, both armed, both wearing the same dark leather with the same brass buckles. They were speaking in low voices, and she caught only fragments through the cold air. The councils moved faster than expected. Harwick's petition has been filed. The Veldmore deed is being contested. She stopped breathing. Harwick. Dorian's uncle. The man with the wide teeth and the still eyes, who had stood in the great hall and discussed her disappearance with the calm of someone managing an estate problem. The Veldmore deed is being contested. Her hand found the doorframe. She pressed her fingertips into the wood and stood very still in the shadow of the threshold, and listened, the way she had learned to listen in Dorian's house, without moving, without sound, letting the words come to her. If she's still alive, she's the only counter to the petition, one of the men said. His voice was low and rough, a soldier's voice. Harwick's claim is that she abandoned the marriage voluntarily and therefore forfeits the deed under the terms of the original contract. She didn't abandon anything, Sebastian said. His voice, quiet as it was, carried a quality that made both men go slightly more still. Not louder, simply more present, the way weight was present, the way stone was present. She fled. There's a difference. And the law distinguishes between the two, if you bring the right witnesses. The council won't hear it unless she presents herself with documentation. She has documentation. A pause. Nellie's heart was very loud in her own ears. How do you know that? The second man asked. Sebastian said nothing, but he turned very slightly, and his blue gaze found the doorway, found her, standing in the shadow of it, her hand on the frame, her hood not yet up. He had known she was there. He had, she suspected, known from the moment she stepped to the door. She stepped outside. The cold hit her face immediately, sharp and clean. She walked across the frost-stiffened grass of the yard and stopped a few feet from the 3 men and looked at Sebastian directly. How long have you known? She asked. Since the 2nd day, he said. She absorbed that. You knew who I was, whose wife I was, whose widow you were intended to become, he said, with a flatness that was not cruelty but precision. He believed in accurate language. She was beginning to understand that about him. Yes. The 2 soldiers were watching her with the careful blankness of men who had been trained to reveal nothing. She barely looked at them. The seal in the chest, she said. You're not just a garrison commander. No. Then what are you? Sebastian held her gaze for a moment. The pre-dawn light was the color of pewter, and it made his eyes look darker, the scar on his cheek more defined. He wore no crown, no robes, no visible mark of status beyond the quality of the leather and the nature of the men who stood beside him, with the posture of people who were accustomed to following someone specific. The Alpha King's enforcer, he said, his right hand on matters of territorial law and border disputes. A brief pause. The Veldmore territory is one of 3 contested parcels in the eastern reaches. I was sent to assess the situation. I arrived to find a cabin with a broken shutter and 2 children who needed feeding and a woman asleep in the frost at the edge of my tree line. Nellie was silent for a moment. The wind moved through the pines. Somewhere nearby, the goat made a sound of mild complaint. "You didn't tell me," she said. "You didn't tell me either," he replied. It was not an accusation, just the same precision, applied evenly. She looked at him for a long time. She was trying to find the shape of the threat in it. The calculation, the angle, the thing he wanted from her that she hadn't yet identified. 3 years of marriage had taught her to look for those things first, before anything else. But his face was the same as it had been every morning for 7 days. Still. Attentive. Without the quality she had learned to dread, that particular blankness that meant a man was looking at you and thinking about something else entirely. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," he said. "You decide whether you want to fight for what's yours." The soldiers left before sunrise, riding north on horses she heard but did not see through the trees. Sebastian came back inside without explanation. He stoked the fire. He woke the children with the same quiet efficiency he applied to everything, and Petra got up immediately, and Finn complained, and then didn't, and the morning arranged itself around the small rituals that had developed over a week without anyone deciding on them. Nellie pouring the heated water, Sebastian cutting bread, Petra insisting on folding the blankets herself, Finn examining everything placed before him as though it might be interesting. Normalcy, she thought. The strange, fragile normalcy of accidental households. She sat across from Sebastian at the table after the children had gone outside to collect kindling, a task Petra had assigned herself with an air of great authority. And she set her hands flat on the table and said, "Tell me what Harwick has filed." He told her. The petition claimed abandonment. It claimed that Nellie, of unstable health and uncertain wolf status, had voluntarily fled the marital home, thereby voiding the land agreement under the clause that required the Omega spouse to remain in residence. It claimed that the Veldmore parcel reverted to the husband's family upon abandonment, same as upon death. It requested immediate council recognition of Harwick's authority over the territory, bypassing Dorian entirely, which told Nellie with cold clarity that Dorian was either already dead or had served his purpose and been set aside. She sat with that for a moment. She had not loved Dorian. She was not sure she had ever felt anything for him beyond the cautious hope of someone trying to make peace with a situation. But the news of his probable fate landed in her chest as something. Grief, perhaps, for the man she had briefly believed he might become. For the marriage she had spent 3 years trying to build from nothing. She did not cry. She breathed through it, the way she had learned to breathe through things. "The deed," she said, "is still yours if you can present it before the council within 14 days. After that, Harwick's petition becomes default. 14 days. She calculated distances. The capital, Veldmore's seat of council, was 6 days' ride from the cabin's location on the eastern road. If the weather held, if she had a horse, which she did not, if she had an advocate before the council, which she also did not. And if I present it, what weight does it carry without witnesses to the circumstances of my flight? Sebastian was quiet for a moment. He turned his clay cup in his hands, a slow, absent motion that she had noticed before when he was organizing his thinking. "I am a witness," he said. "I found you on the eastern road, on foot, in the dark, in the first week of winter frost, with no horse and no escort. That is not the picture of a woman who abandoned her home voluntarily." He met her eyes. "And I carry the king's authority on territorial matters. My witness carries weight. Nellie looked at him. Something moved in her chest. Not the flutter she had been trained to distrust, not the dangerous warmth of wanting to believe too quickly. Something steadier. The particular feeling of a door opening in a direction she had not expected. Why? She asked. Quietly, but directly. You don't know me. You owe me nothing. You could let Harwick's petition stand and remove one contested parcel from your list of problems. Sebastian set down the cup. He looked at her with those pale, still eyes. And he said, with the same flat precision he applied to everything, because the law exists to protect people like you from people like Harwick. And because I watched you fix a broken hinge in the dark with frozen hands and not ask anyone for praise or permission. A pause. Brief, but weighted. And because my children have not smiled the way they smiled this week in longer than I can easily account for. Nellie was quiet. Outside, she could hear Petra directing Finn in the collection of kindling with the full authority of a future Alpha's second-in-command, and Finn responding with what sounded like philosophical objections. She looked down at her hands on the table, scarred at the knuckles from years of practical work. Steady now, in a way they had not been the night she fled. 14 days, she said again. Yes. She raised her eyes to his. Then we should leave by tomorrow. Something in Sebastian's expression shifted, almost imperceptibly, but she was learning to read the small changes, the slight easing around his eyes, the fractional release of a jaw that was usually held in restraint. Yes, he said, we should. They rode out at first light, the four of them, on 2 horses from the small garrison post, half a league east of the cabin that Sebastian had not mentioned until that morning. Nellie did not comment on the things he had not mentioned. She was beginning to understand that he withheld information, not from deception, but from a kind of precision. He told her what she needed when she needed it, and nothing before. It was, she thought, the most respectful form of silence she had ever encountered. Finn rode in front of Sebastian on the larger horse, a dark gray destrier with the calm temperament of an animal that had seen enough of the world to be unimpressed by it. Petra rode behind Nellie on the brown mare, her small arms around Nellie's waist with a matter-of-fact grip that suggested she had made her decision about Nellie and was not interested in revisiting it. The road east was frost-hardened and narrow through the pines, and the cold was the kind that had no edge to it, not sharp, but total, pressing in from every direction. Nellie kept her gray hood up and her hands steady on the reins, and tried not to think about what waited in the capital. The council chamber. The men who would look at her. Omega, wolf-sick. Abandoned husband conveniently dead, and find a dozen reasons why the law should bend toward Harwick's gold, rather than her deed. You're doing it again, Petra said, from behind her. Nellie blinked. Doing what? Going somewhere in your head where everything is bad. The girl said it with the serenity of someone reporting the weather. Father does it too. His shoulders go like this. There was a subtle adjustment of Petra's grip that somehow communicated tightened shoulders without words. Nellie found, to her own surprise, that the corner of her mouth moved. Your father's shoulders are rather more imposing than mine. Yours do it too, Petra said, unapologetically, just smaller. Ahead on the road, Sebastian said nothing, but she saw from the side. The very slight shift of his jaw that she had learned meant he was suppressing something. She straightened her shoulders deliberately. Petra made a small sound of approval. They stopped for the night at a wayfarer's inn 2 days east of the cabin, a low stone building with a thatched roof and a stable yard smelling of hay and horse, and the particular warm yeast smell of a kitchen working through the evening. Sebastian arranged the rooms without ceremony, taking coin from his own purse without discussion, and Nellie did not argue because she had learned to choose her battles, and this was not one. But in the corridor, before she took the children to the smaller room, she caught his arm. He stopped, looked down at her hand on his forearm, then at her face, neither flinching nor crowding, simply present. I will repay it, she said, Every coin, when this is settled. He held her gaze for a moment. I know, he said. She let go of his arm. She was almost to the door when he spoke again, quiet enough that the children, already inside arguing about who would take which pallet, could not hear. Nellie. She turned. Harwick will have men on the eastern road, he said. He'll know by now that the petition has been challenged. He may try to prevent you reaching the council. He paused. And in the pause was the weight of what he wasn't saying. That this road had become dangerous in ways that exceeded contested land deeds. That this was no longer only a legal matter. Stay close tomorrow. She looked at him. In the low torchlight of the corridor, with the smell of tallow and old wood around them, she could see the detail of his face more clearly than the gray morning light allowed. The line of the scar, the dark of his braids, the quality of attention in his blue eyes that she had spent days trying to categorize and had finally given up on, because it didn't fit any category she'd been given. I'm not accustomed to staying close to anyone, she said, not defiant, just honest. I know that too, he said. She went inside. She lay awake for a long time, listening to the children breathe, and the inn settle around her, and the wind outside finding every gap in the thatch, and she thought about what it meant that he knew these things about her. Not from her telling him, but from watching, from the particular quality of attention he brought to everything in his vicinity. She was not sure whether it frightened her or not. She was not sure she had the architecture left for uncomplicated fear. What she knew was that it had been a very long time since anyone had seen her accurately, and the experience was disorienting in the way of walking into a room lit brightly after hours in the dark. Harwick's men found them on the third day of riding, at a narrow crossing where the eastern road bridged a frozen stream between two ridges of dense pine. There were 4 of them, mounted, positioned at the crossing with the studied casualness of people pretending to be there by coincidence. They wore no livery. Deliberately, she noted, but their horses were too well fed and their weapons too well kept for common road travelers. Sebastian saw them before she did. She knew because she felt the slight change in the horse ahead, the destrier reading its rider's shift in posture through some silent communication of muscle and weight that she would have missed if she hadn't been watching. Take the children to the tree line, he said. Quiet, without alarm. East side, not west. Wait. Sebastian? Nellie. He said her name the way he said everything, without ornament, but with full weight. His blue eyes found hers for just a moment. Please. She took the children into the trees. Petra went without protest, which told Nellie that Petra had done this before and knew what it meant. Finn held her hand with both of his and said nothing, which was its own kind of communication. From the tree line, through the lattice of bare branches, she watched. She had expected conflict. She had expected the brutal immediacy of 4 armed men against 1. What she had not expected was the quality of Sebastian's stillness as he brought the destrier to the center of the bridge and simply stopped. He did not draw his sword. He did not call out. He simply sat there, in his black leather and his wolf fur mantle, with the cold light on his braids and his hands loose on the reins, and he waited. The 4 riders conferred briefly. One of them moved forward. We're looking for a woman, the lead rider said. Omega, fair hair, gray cloak. She's wanted for questioning in a matter of territorial law. You'll need a council writ for that, Sebastian said. Do you have one? A pause. We represent Lord Harwick of... I know who you represent. Sebastian's voice did not rise. It didn't need to. I asked if you have a writ, signed, sealed, by a council member with jurisdiction over Eastern territories. Another pause, heavier this time. I thought not. Then you're blocking a public crossing without authority, which is a different matter entirely. He reached into the front of his leather armor and produced a folded parchment, not the one from the chest, a different one, and held it up with 2 fingers. From the tree line, Nellie could not read it, but she could see the crimson wax at its base. I have authorization from the AlphaKing himself to escort witnesses in territorial disputes to the capital under royal protection. You are currently obstructing that escort. I recommend you move. The silence at the bridge stretched for a long moment. The horses shifted. The frozen stream made no sound beneath its ice. The 4 riders moved. Sebastian did not watch them go. He turned the destrier toward the tree line and found her eyes through the branches immediately, as though he had always known exactly where she was standing. They reached the capital on the 5th day, as the gray afternoon sky pressed low over the city's stone rooftops, and the smell of coal smoke and bread and river mud rose to meet them on the road. Nellie had been here once as a child, holding her father's hand in the market square while he bargained for wool. She remembered the size of it, the way it made her feel simultaneously small and part of something vast, and the memory sat strange against the present moment, against the fact of what she was riding toward. Sebastian arranged lodging near the council quarter, a respectable house, a widow who kept rooms and asked no questions of the AlphaKing's men, which Nellie gathered was an arrangement of some standing. There was a room for the children, who had by this point developed strong opinions about their preferred sleeping arrangements, and negotiated them with Petra's characteristic authority. That evening, Sebastian spread his maps on the table and walked her through what the council session would require. The deed, which she produced from inside her cloak, smoothed flat on the table between them. Her testimony, which he prepared her for with the same methodical thoroughness he applied to terrain. Where to stand, how to address the council members by rank, which arguments Harwick's advocate would deploy, and how to counter them. He did not condescend. He did not simplify. He spoke to her as though she were entirely capable of this, which she was, and the fact that he assumed so without commentary was a thing she felt in her chest more than she expected. At one point he leaned forward to indicate something on the parchment map, a boundary line, the river's curve, and his arm was close beside hers on the table, and she was very aware of the warmth of him, the pine and leather smell that she had grown accustomed to over days of close travel, without fully deciding to. She did not move away. She also did not move closer. She let herself simply exist in the proximity without engineering a response to it, which was, she was discovering, a thing she had not been able to do with another person in a very long time. He glanced at her. Their eyes met at a distance of perhaps a foot. "You're not afraid," he said. It was an observation, with something beneath it that she didn't immediately name. "I am," she said. "I'm simply not letting it choose for me." He held her gaze for a moment longer than he usually did. Then he looked back at the map. But something in the set of his shoulders had changed, and she noticed it the way she noticed most things about him now. Not because she was cataloging him, but because he had become, without her exactly deciding on it, someone she paid attention to. "The council convenes at midday tomorrow," he said. "You should sleep." "So should you," she said, the ghost of that not-quite smile. "I'll be fine." She rose from the table. At the door to her room she paused, her hand on the frame, the same gesture she had made at the cabin door, the night this all began. She thought about that, about the strange circularity of it. "Sebastian," she said. He looked up. "Whatever happens tomorrow." She chose her words carefully, because careful words were the ones that meant what she intended them to mean. "Thank you. Not for the legal advocacy, for the morning of the shutter, and the broth, and the blanket, and the way you spoke to me as though I was a person who could manage her own circumstances." He was quiet for a moment. "You are," he said simply. She went to bed. She slept this time, without difficulty, deeply, in the way of someone who had set something down that they had been carrying too long, and felt for the first time the absence of that particular weight. Tomorrow, she would face the council. Tomorrow, she would stand in the capital's hall of law and speak her name and hand over her father's deed and tell the truth of what had been done to her. But tonight, in a borrowed room in a stone house near the river, with the children sleeping next door, and Sebastian's map spread on the table in the next room, and the faint smell of tallow candles and river water coming through the shuttered window, she allowed herself to feel something she had not felt since her father pressed that deed into her hands over morning porridge and told her simply, "This is yours. Safe." Not because danger had passed, but because for the first time in 3 years, she was not alone in it. The council hall smelled of old stone and beeswax and the particular staleness of power that had been exercised in the same room for too many generations. Nellie stood at the center of it with her gray cloak brushed clean and her golden braid pinned back and her father's deed in her hands, and she did not tremble. She had made a decision that morning, dressing in the pale light before the children woke, that she would not walk into that hall as a woman apologizing for her own survival. She would walk in as the rightful holder of the Veldmore deed, because that was what she was, and no amount of Harwick's gold or Dorian's silence from beyond whatever grave he had been given would change the fact of it. Lord Harwick stood across the chamber with his advocate, a thin man in gray wool who held his parchments with the smugness of someone accustomed to winning on procedural grounds. Harwick himself looked older than she remembered, or perhaps simply smaller, here in the capital's hall, where his particular brand of local menace had less room to expand. He saw her and went very still. Then his gaze moved to Sebastian, who stood 2 paces behind her left shoulder, and something in Harwick's expression shifted. A recalculation, visible even across the distance. Good, she thought. Let him recalculate. The council was 5 members, seated at a curved table of dark oak. The head counselor, an older woman, alpha ranked by the authority in her posture, silver-haired, with the patient expression of someone who had heard every possible argument and was willing to hear them all again, looked at Nellie with the direct attention of someone conducting an assessment rather than a performance. "State your name and your claim," the head counselor said. Nellie stepped forward. "My name is Nellie of Veldmore, daughter of Edric of Veldmore, holder of the Eastern parcel deed by direct inheritance under my father's seal." She placed the deed on the table before the council. "I am here to contest Lord Harwick's petition on the grounds that my departure from the marital residence was not voluntary abandonment, but flight from a documented conspiracy against my life." Harwick's advocate began to speak. Sebastian stepped forward and presented the council with a sealed letter, the AlphaKing's own hand, she understood now, authorizing Sebastian to act in this matter with full royal weight. The advocate stopped speaking. The council read the letter. The head counselor looked at Harwick with an expression that contained no particular warmth. What followed was not swift, but it was, in the end, inevitable. Sebastian gave his witness account, precise, detailed, delivered in the same flat, accurate language he applied to everything. She had been found on foot, alone in the first frost, fleeing a household where her death had been discussed as a convenience. He named the date, the location, the condition of her feet, the absence of horse or escort or any indication of planned departure. He named the 2 men who had blocked the crossing without a writ, and he named the lord they served. Nellie gave her own account. She spoke clearly, without ornamentation, without tears. Not because she didn't feel the weight of it, but because she had decided that the truth was sufficiently heavy without performance. She told them what she had heard through the wall. She told them what Dorian had said. She told them what she had taken with her, and why. And she told them about her father's deed, and what it meant, and why it was hers. Harwick's advocate argued the abandonment clause until the head counselor raised one hand and silenced him with the economy of someone who had made her decision. "The petition is denied," she said. "The Veldmore Eastern parcel deed remains with its rightful holder. Lord Harwick's claim is recorded as fraudulent, and will be referred for further investigation into the circumstances of his nephew's death. She looked at Harwick directly, with the particular stillness of an alpha who did not need to raise her voice to communicate consequence. You may go, my lord. You will find that the road home is considerably longer than you remember. Harwick left. He did not look at Nellie as he passed. She did not require him to. Outside the council hall, in the cold afternoon air with the city spreading around them and the smell of wood smoke and river water carrying on the wind, Nellie stood for a moment with the deed in her hands. Signed now, resealed, the council's own mark pressed beside her father's in fresh wax, and felt the specific, disorienting weight of something that had been taken from her and returned. Sebastian stood beside her. He said nothing, because he was Sebastian, and nothing was often the most accurate response. It's done, she said, mostly to hear the words. It's done, he confirmed. She looked at the deed, at her father's seal, old and slightly imperfect where the wax had settled unevenly, the way it always did when he pressed it himself rather than having a servant do it. She remembered the morning he had given it to her, the porridge, the ordinary light, the way he had handed her the most important thing he owned, as though it were simply the right thing to do, which to him it had been. She had not let herself grieve him properly. There had not been room for it in Dorian's house, where grief was an inconvenience and Omegas were expected to be manageable. She allowed herself, standing in the cold air of the capital with the deed sealed and the case closed, and Harwick walking toward a reckoning she had set in motion, to feel it. Just for a moment. The loss of him. The years he had not seen. The pride he would have had, she thought, in the daughter who fixed broken things and kept her father's seal against her heartbeat, and walked into a council hall alone and spoke clearly. She breathed through it. She let it settle. Then she folded the deed and placed it inside her cloak, and turned to Sebastian, and found him watching her with the same quality of attention he had always given her. Direct, undemanding, simply present. What happens to the cabin? She asked. Something shifted in his expression. The garrison post in the east is being transferred. The cabin was temporary shelter while I assessed the territorial situation. A pause. It has no further official purpose. And the children? They go where I go. His jaw was very slightly set, the way it was when he was navigating something that mattered to him more than he was going to say directly. She looked at him for a long moment. All the things she could say arranged themselves in her mind, and she chose among them with care, the way she chose everything now. Petra told me, she said, that in 6 days at that cabin, she learned to rehang a shutter hinge, mend a wool hem, and convince a goat to return to her pen using only her voice and a handful of dried grass. She paused. She said she intends to learn everything else I know. Sebastian's expression did something she had not seen it do before. It opened, slightly. Not much, because he was not a man built for much, but enough. Enough that she could see what was behind the discipline and the precision and the careful economy of words. Petra, he said, has never in her life waited for permission to decide what she wants. She gets that from someone, Nellie said. The not-quite smile arrived, and this time it completed itself. It changed his face in a way that made her chest do something she did not try to manage or analyze or prepare a defense against. She simply let it happen. Nellie, he said. Yes. The Veldmore parcel, when you return to it. He chose his words with the same care she used, which she had noticed and valued more than she had told him. It will need work. 3 years of Dorian's neglect, the eastern fence line, the tenant cottages, the mill by the river that your father built. A pause. It's a great deal for one person. She looked at him steadily. Are you offering to fix my estate, Sebastian? I'm offering, he said, to not be somewhere else. It was, she thought, the most precisely romantic thing anyone had ever said to her. Because it was not a promise of grandeur, or a declaration of passion, or a vow made in the heat of a moment that would cool by morning. It was simply the truth of what he was offering, his presence, consistent and chosen, with full knowledge of what that presence entailed, and what she entailed, and what the Veldmore parcel in winter entailed. She had been given grand promises before. She knew what they were worth. This was worth something different. "Then don't be somewhere else," she said. They returned to Veldmore as winter deepened, all 4 of them, on 2 horses, with the deed safe and the case closed, and Harwick referred to the King's justice, which found him the following spring and was thorough. The tenant farmers of the eastern parcel, who had spent 3 years under Dorian's indifferent management, received their new lady with the cautious warmth of people who had learned to wait before trusting. Nellie did not ask for their trust. She fixed the eastern fence line and opened the mill, and learned the name of every family on the parcel before the first thaw. Petra learned the rest of what Nellie knew, and then began inventing knowledge of her own, which Nellie encouraged. Finn lost another tooth, and gained another opinion about everything. Sebastian repaired the tenant cottages with the same methodical efficiency he brought to garrison posts and council hearings and broken shutter hinges, and he was there every morning and every evening, and the space between them narrowed by degrees, not rushed, not forced, but honest, the way things grew when the ground was right. In early spring, under a sky that had finally remembered how to be blue, Sebastian found her at the river where her father's mill wheel was turning for the first time in 4 years. He stood beside her, and they watched the water, and he took her hand, simply, without ceremony, and she let him, simply, without fear. They married quietly in the mill yard when the apple trees bloomed, with Petra standing guard over the ceremony with proprietary satisfaction, and Finn presenting a somewhat bedraggled wildflower bouquet he had assembled himself and considered magnificent. The AlphaKing sent a formal letter of recognition, bearing the crimson seal she now knew well. The council recorded the union. The Veldmore parcel, fully restored, passed into joint stewardship, its deeds signed in both their hands. Her father's seal sat on the desk in the study where Nellie worked each morning, beside a jar of dried lavender and a stack of estate records and Sebastian's maps, which had a way of spreading across every available surface regardless of the room. She did not mind. She was, at last, exactly where she was supposed to be. Not because fate had placed her there, but because she had fought for it, survived it, fixed what was broken, and chosen, with clear eyes and a steady heart, to stay.